My dad left a voicemail. "Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties." I just texted back, "Understood." Then I quietly pulled my name from the family business loan. 36 hours later, 78 missed calls from Mom, a series of panicked emails from Dad, and a screaming voicemail from his accountant. "We need to talk." I noticed my dad's missed call just as I was about to shut down my laptop. We weren't exactly the kind of family that exchanged daily updates, so I figured it had to be something important. I played the message on the speaker as I packed my things, half listening as I shoved my laptop into its case. "Don't come to the family reunion. We're breaking up." I paused, one hand frozen on the zipper of my laptop. There it was, 7 words clear as day, his voice as flat and final as the bang of a hammer. I played it again just to make sure I hadn't misheard. "Don't come to the family reunion. We're breaking up." I stood there for a moment, the echo of his voice ringing in my head, a slow pulse of disbelief settling in. It was as simple, as coldly efficient a message as canceling a meeting or a subscription. After a long minute, I tossed my phone back on the desk, sank into my chair, and let my mind work through the layers of that sentence. Breaking up. Was he talking about our family or our business? Both. Neither. The reunion was supposed to be a big deal this year, the first time we'd all been together in years. A chance to bury old grudges and pretend for a weekend that we were a normal functioning family. I picked up my phone again, thumbs hovering over the screen. A dozen replies flickered through my mind, each one angrier than the last. But finally, I just tapped a single word. "Okay." No punctuation, no follow-up. I put the phone down and sat back, my mind already racing over the implications. If he wanted to end things, fine. I wasn't going to beg for an explanation. But if he thought he could cut me out without a second thought, he had another thing coming. I reached down and pulled out the thick leather-bound ledger from my bottom drawer, the one we'd used to formalize the family business loan. There was my name, a neat signature in black ink next to my parents', a testament to years of shared effort and risk. I ran my finger over it, the weight of that promise pressing down on me. Then, with a slow, deliberate stroke, I crossed my name off. The sound of the pen cutting through the paper felt like a physical act of separation. I closed the book and tossed it back in the drawer, the heavy thud echoing through the quiet office. That night, I called my attorney and outlined the steps to remove myself from the company's financial obligations. If my father wanted to play this game, I wasn't going to let him hold my future hostage. The next day, I acted quickly. I canceled my upcoming flight, erased the reunion date from my calendar, and sent a brief, professional email to my parents confirming my intention to step away from the business and requesting a full financial audit. No pleasantries, no attempts to patch things up, just the cold, clear language of a businessman walking away from a bad deal. 36 hours later, my phone lit up with a tidal wave of missed calls. 78 from my mother alone, dozens more from my sister, and a handful from my father. I scrolled through the frantic texts, the panicked voicemails, the increasingly desperate emails from his accountant. My father's messages began with cautious, probing questions like a man testing thin ice. But as the hours passed and my silence grew longer, they became more urgent. His words tinged with something I hadn't heard in his voice in years. Fear. His accountant, a humorless man I'd never liked, left a message that crackled with anxiety. "David, we need to talk urgently." I leaned back in my chair and let a slow smile creep across my face. I'd given them a head start, but now the storm had really hit. I was just getting started. Ignoring their cries felt good. Felt right. I knew I'd kicked a hornet's nest, but I wasn't going to stick around just to get stung. My dad wanted a clean break, and I was happy to give it to him. By the third day, the messages had gone from confused to desperate. My mother's voicemails were full of breathless pleas, her words tumbling over each other in a rush. My sister, Emily, tried a softer approach, mixing her texts with worried check-ins and half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. "Hey, David, I don't know what's going on, but I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Let's talk." I didn't answer. I knew Emily meant well, but I also knew my dad too well to think this was just a misunderstanding. If he'd called for a breakup, it meant he'd already decided I wasn't a part of his plans anymore. Then on the fourth day, I got an email from the bank that runs the family business. I opened it cautiously, bracing myself for whatever new disaster my parents had cooked up. As I scanned the document, my jaw dropped. My father had quietly tried to transfer all the remaining funds into a separate account in his name. He'd even initiated the paperwork to dissolve the original LLC, effectively cutting me out of the picture entirely. The only reason the bank flagged it was because my name was still on some of the original documents. That was it. My dad wasn't just trying to break up the family. He was trying to cut me off completely, cleanly, and for good. He probably thought I'd sit back, too stunned or hurt to act. He didn't realize that by crossing that line, he'd given me the perfect excuse to hit back. I took a deep breath, then called my lawyer. We had a long, intense conversation, and by the end of it, the wheels were in motion for something much bigger than just removing my name from a business loan. The next morning, I pulled together every scrap of paper I had on the family business contracts, tax returns, emails, and financial statements. I spent hours compiling a comprehensive dossier, highlighting every shady move, every questionable expense, every suspicious transaction my father had ever made. Years of suppressed frustration fueled my focus. And when I was done, I had a thick, damning stack of evidence. I filed an official complaint with the bank and froze all accounts pending a full audit. I also filed a request with the IRS to investigate possible tax fraud, attaching the most incriminating pieces of my dossier. I didn't know if it would stick, but I was willing to find out. Finally, just for good measure, I sent the whole package to my father's biggest client, a longtime family friend who I knew wouldn't like the idea of being involved in a potentially fraudulent deal. If my father wanted a war, I'd make sure he felt every inch of the battlefield. When I finally settled back in my chair that night, my phone buzzed again. Emily, I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. After a long moment, I answered, David. Her voice was small, almost shy. I could picture her curled up on her couch, probably wringing her hands the way she always did when she was worried. Yes, I know you're angry, and I don't blame you, but can we talk? Just you and me. I paused, weighing my options. Despite everything, I didn't want to drag her into the middle of this mess. She'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to hold us together when everything else fell apart. All right, I finally said. Let's meet tomorrow. As I hung up, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in days, a hint of doubt, but I pushed it away. This wasn't just business. This was personal now, and I wasn't going to back down. The next day, I met Emily at a small cafe on the edge of town, a place we used to frequent when we were broke college kids living on coffee and cheap sandwiches. She was already there, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, her eyes darting nervously to the door every few seconds. When she saw me, her shoulders relaxed a bit, but her smile was tight, her worries still clear. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before she finally spoke. David, what's wrong? She asked, leaning in as if the whole cafe was listening. Dad's losing it. Mom's a wreck. They think you're trying to destroy the business. I took a slow sip of my coffee, trying to decide how much to tell her. She deserved to know the truth, but I didn't want to drag her deeper into the mess. They tried to cut me out completely. Dad's been moving money into a separate account, trying to dissolve the LLC behind my back. I'm just making sure they can't burn me on the way out. Her eyes went wide. That can't be right. He wouldn't just know, there must be some mistake. I pushed a thin folder across the table. It contained a few carefully selected pages, just enough to make my point without overwhelming her. Bank transfer requests, some questionable invoices, and a few emails in which my father had explicitly asked his accountant to speed up the separation process. She flipped through the papers, her face growing paler with each page. Oh my God. This is a lot of money, David. She paused, her fingers trembling slightly as she held up a highlighted statement. 75,000 just gone? Yes, I said, leaning back. And that's just the beginning. He's been siphoning off funds for months, maybe years. I caught a transfer of 150 grand to a private account in his name, marked business development expenses. I leaned closer and lowered my voice. Emily, if I hadn't retired when I did, I'd be on the hook for all of it. She closed the folder and pressed her palm flat against it, as if she could push the ugly truth back inside. David, you have to talk to him, she said, her voice breaking slightly. There's got to be another explanation. Dad's, he's not perfect, but he's not a thief. I exhaled, my jaw clenching. I talked to him, ma'am. I gave him a chance to explain. You know what he did? He left me a 7-word voicemail that broke up the family. She looked down, her eyes filled with tears. I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. I'd made my decision. Just please don't destroy it, she whispered. Mom's already talking about selling the house if this blows up. I don't know if they'll survive. I stood up and dropped a 20 on the table to cover our coffees. I'm not the one who started this, Emily, but I promise you, I'm going to finish it. As I turned to leave, she reached out and grabbed my arm. Please just think about it. I paused, the weight of her hand on my sleeve, reminding me of the nights she used to sneak into my room as a child, terrified of thunderstorms, clinging to me like I was the only solid thing in a world of chaos. I nodded and walked out, the bell above the door ringing sharply behind me. That evening, I got a notice from the bank the freeze on my father's accounts had gone through. They'd flagged over $250,000 in suspicious transactions, with several large, some still to be transferred. I pictured my father sitting in his office watching the numbers tick down, his carefully built financial empire unraveling by the hour. I wasn't just cutting myself loose. I was setting the whole ship on fire. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing like a hornet's nest. My email inbox was flooded with notifications from the bank, my lawyer, and a few panicked messages from my father's accountant. The audit had come sooner than I expected, and it was clearly making waves. I scrolled through the latest updates from the bank. They'd frozen over $400,000 in assets across several accounts and flagged another $200,000 in unexplained withdrawals going back 6 months. It was a financial stranglehold enough to shut down the business. An hour later, my sister Emily called. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. David, what did you do? She asked, her voice cracking with fear. I did what I had to do, I replied, trying to keep my tone even. They were trying to cut me out. I just made sure they couldn't. They're freaking out, David. Dad's talking about lawyers, about pressing charges for sabotage. Mom hasn't stopped crying since yesterday. This is getting out of hand. I sat back and rubbed my temple. I hadn't expected them to crack so quickly. But then again, they'd never been good at dealing with the fallout when their plans blew up in their faces. Emily, I gave them a chance. Dad made his move and I made mine. I'm not backing down. There was a long, tense silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, could almost picture her gripping the phone, knuckles white with worry. Please just meet with them, she said finally. One last time for me. I hesitated. I owed Emily at least that much. She'd always been the one to play peacemaker, the one to smooth things over when our parents' tempers flared and resentments festered. All right, I said, my voice low, but this is the last time. We met at my parents' house that night. The place looked the same as it had for decades. The carefully manicured lawn, the polished front steps, the heavy oak door that always felt more like a barrier than an invitation. My mother opened the door, her eyes red and puffy. She pulled me into a shaky hug and whispered a strained, "Thanks for coming." Inside, my father was pacing the living room. His jaw clenched so tightly I could almost hear his teeth grinding. The room felt thick with unspoken accusations, the kind of tension that made the air taste metallic. "Sit down," he said, barely looking at me. I dropped into one of the leather chairs, my eyes drifting to the family portraits lining the walls, a curated history of forced smiles and staged happiness. "So, what's this about?" I asked, leaning back. My father turned to me, his face flushed. "What the hell do you think you're doing, David? Freezing the accounts? Getting an audit? You're tearing this family apart." I met his gaze and felt a pulse of anger rise in my chest. "You tore this family apart the second you tried to cut me out. You think I wouldn't notice $250,000 disappearing into a private account? You think I'm just going to sit back and watch you destroy the company I helped build?" My mother flinched at my words, her hand covering her mouth as if she could physically hold back her shock. My father's face twisted, his eyes sharp and angry. You have no idea what you've done. I've got deals in the pipeline, investments in place. If you freeze these accounts, it could ruin everything. That's not my problem. I shot back. You made your decision when you tried to cut me out of the business. I'm just protecting what's mine. There was a long, tense silence broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Then my dad leaned in, his voice deep and dangerous. Fine. You want to play hardball? You want to burn this family down? I'll show you what it really looks like. I felt a flicker of unease, a cold twist of foreboding in my gut, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. I come too far to back down now. Emily stepped between us, her hands raised like a referee trying to break up a street fight. Please stop, both of you. This isn't helping. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. You wanted me here, Emily. I came, but I'm done trying to reason with him. I turned and walked out, my mother's soft sobs echoing behind me as I slammed the door. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed with a new email, a message from my lawyer. My parents had just filed a lawsuit, claiming that I had sabotaged the business and illegally taken control of their accounts. I let out a bitter laugh and threw my phone on the passenger seat. So this was how they wanted to play it. Fine, I'd given them a chance to walk away. Now I'd make sure they had nothing left to fight for. The lawsuit hit me harder than I expected. My father had gone nuclear, accusing me of everything from embezzlement to corporate sabotage. His claims were outrageous, but the stakes were real. If he could convince a judge that I'd illegally seized the accounts, I could be on the hook for hundreds of thousands in damages. I spent the next week buried in legal documents, my lawyer working overtime to counter each new motion they filed. My parents had even dragged Emily into it, calling her as a witness against me, probably hoping to break my resolve. Stung, but I couldn't blame her. She was stuck in the middle, trying to keep the family from imploding. Then, 2 days before the first court date, I received a message from my father's accountant. I'd assumed the man was on my parents' side, but this time his tone was different, nervous, almost pleading. David, we need to meet in private. There are things you need to know. I met him that night in a quiet bar on the outskirts of town. He was already there when I arrived, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his trembling hand. He looked older than I remembered, his usually crisp shirt rumpled, his eyes hollow. He waved me over, his eyes darting nervously around the room. David, I shouldn't be here. If they find out, relax, I said, sitting down across from him. Just tell me what this is about. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Your father. He's been hiding money for years. Offshore accounts, shell companies, under-the-table cash deals. At first, I thought it was just a tax dodge, but it's much worse. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I'd expected some financial mismanagement, maybe a bit of creative accounting, but this sounded like a whole other level of deception. He slid a flash drive across the table, his hand shaking so badly I thought he might spill his drink. Everything you need is on here. Bank statements, wire transfers, even some less than legal contracts. It's enough to sink him completely. I pocketed the drive, my mind racing. If this was real, it could turn the whole trial on its head. Why are you telling me this? I asked, eyeing him closely. He drained the last of his whiskey, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. Because I'm not going down with them, David. I have a family to protect, too. That night, I sat in my office, the computer screen flickering as I scrolled through the files. It was all their years of dirty dealings, false invoices, unreported income, and shady offshore transfers. Over $750,000 had been quietly siphoned out of the company with my father's name on every transaction. The next morning, I sent everything to my lawyer along with a note. Let's get this over with. By the time the court date arrived, my parents were backed into a corner. Their accounts were frozen. Their business reputation was in tatters. And now, with this new evidence, they were staring down the barrel of potential criminal charges. My father's face was a mask of fury as he entered the courtroom. His eyes locked on mine with a mixture of betrayal and barely contained rage. My mother looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes rimmed with red. The judge took less than an hour to rule. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was dismissed and the court ordered a full forensic audit of my parents' finances. I watched my father's face crumble as reality set, and he hadn't just lost the business. He'd lost everything. A week later, Emily called. She'd found my parents a small apartment in a rundown complex on the edge of town, barely a fraction of the sprawling home they once owned. She didn't ask for my help, and I didn't offer it, but I sent them a few months' rent, more for her sake than theirs. As for me, I signed the final papers to dissolve the family business, severing the last financial ties between us. My father had always said that family and business shouldn't mix, and in the end, he was right. Emily still calls, checking in now and then, always careful to avoid the subject of our parents. I know she's still hoping for a miracle, some last-minute reconciliation, but I'm not sure I have it in me. Maybe one day I'll sit down with them and listen to whatever excuses they come up with. Maybe I'll even let them back into my life, just enough to keep Emily from having to choose sides. But for now, I'm content to let the silence stretch out. My parents left with nothing but each other, their empire reduced to dust. A few months have passed and the dust has mostly settled. My parents are still in that cramped apartment on the edge of town, a far cry from the sprawling house they once flaunted like a badge of honor. Emily tells me they're struggling to adjust, their pride bruised, their savings depleted by legal fees and back taxes. She called me last week, her voice hesitant. They want to see you, David. They're trying to make things right. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, the familiar weight of old wounds settling in my chest. I didn't answer right away. I knew she'd already taken on the burden of caring for them, paying some of their bills when their accounts were frozen, helping them move into that dingy apartment. She was the only one left who believed in the possibility of forgiveness. All right, I finally said. I'll come. Yesterday, I drove over and parked my car in the cracked lot in front of her new building. The walls were thin, the paint peeling, the hallways heavy with the smell of fried food and old carpet. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorbell, the memories of our last explosive encounter replaying in my mind. When my father opened the door, I barely recognized him. He looked smaller, his shoulders hunched, his hair thinner, his eyes clouded with something that looked a lot like regret. My mother stood behind him, her face pale and drawn, her eyes watering as she reached out to hug me. We sat in their tiny living room, the mismatched furniture and cluttered shelves, a stark contrast to the polished, perfect home they used to show off. They stumbled through their apologies, their voices strained and uncertain, as if they'd forgotten how to speak to me without a trace of authority. We made mistakes, my father said, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. We thought we could fix it, keep the family together, but we went too far. I listened, my face a careful mask, my heart a quiet, uncertain throb in my chest. Part of me wanted to get up, walk out, and never look back. But another part, the part that still remembered family game nights, long drives to the beach, and the way my dad taught me to fix bikes in the garage, kept me in my seat. After a long, awkward silence, my mother reached out, her hand trembling as it covered mine. Please, David, let's start over. I didn't promise them anything. I just nodded, got up and left. Now, as I sit here staring at that blinking cursor, I'm not sure I made the right choice. Maybe I should have just walked away and let them live with the consequences of their actions. But part of me hopes that maybe, just maybe, some broken things can be put back together. So, Reddit, did I do the right thing? Thanks for following the whole story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe for more updates and stories.